within NATO itself, which is a fairly disparate organisation, so it's hard to keep things secret at a sort of at the media level. There are instructions to keep some things secret. There are instructions, as an example, to keep the fact that Jordan is an ISAF partner in the war in Afghanistan secret. This is a most extraordinary thing. That Sweden is a partner in ISAF. Many other countries are a partner in ISAF. And yet, the public of Sweden is not to know that Jordan is a partner in the war that is occurring in Afghanistan. Is that an acceptable way for NATO to behave, not only to the rest of the world, but an acceptable way for NATO to treat its own domestic populations? So you can see where this sort of thing is coming from. It comes from a desire by Jordan to keep the truth from its population. So we see the lie starts to spread. For domestic reasons, Jordan, as an Islamic country, doesn't want to be seen to be a US puppet pushing troops into Afghanistan. Of course, it is the strongest, arguably the strongest or most supportive Muslim nation in the Middle East towards the United States. A favourite place historically a favourite place to conduct rendition operations. But of course it doesn't want to tell its people that it has sent troops into Afghanistan. And so that lie then spreads to NATO countries and ISAF countries, who were then instructed to conceal that Jordan is an active participant in this coalition. Subsequent to the initial release of the Afghan war diaries, I hope everyone here is educated about this. Otherwise, I'll be saying things you don't understand. But how many people here know that there were 92,000 documents released, other than the fact that I just said it? Okay. So you have a feeling for this. And I should say, the feeling that other people have. And an interesting difference in perception versus reality. So, the Pew Research Center in the United States, conservative media research body, polled 1,000 people at the end of the week when we and the New York Times and the Spiegel released the news about this archive. That poll revealed that it was the most spoken about story of that week. It had greater public recognition than Chelsea Clinton's wedding, which I think is an incredibly optimistic sign. And that some 30% of people wanted there to be more information about it, that it felt the media had underreported. Interestingly, 6% felt that Chelsea Clinton's wedding had been underreported. But the total news volume, the total war reporting in the United States for that week increased 300%. From, have a guess, what do you think the average news reporting about war is in the United States? So it's 6%. Although there's this extraordinary war, two of them, there's only 6% of the news is about these wars. But anyway, for that week it increased to 18%. And 50% of the population stated that they believed that the release of this information was in the public interest. In fact, the release of classified information is in the public interest, which, if you know the US media, is was a surprise to me. I thought it would have been about 15 to 20% because classified information and patriotism seem to be written in the same font or on the same page when you read the press. But actually, when you go to the people, it seems that the majority of people under the age of 50 believe that it is correct to release classified information under those circumstances, and the slight majority over the age of 50 believe the opposite. So I see that as a very interesting outcome. Another fact from that study is that the support for the war dropped about 30% in the US population. And of course that will possibly swing around a bit, but there's no doubt that the release of this true information compared to the opinion and editorial that has been crowding the American media has changed people's perceptions about what is going on in Afghanistan. Okay, so subsequent to the release, we're enhanced sort of ways of understanding this material. Now, it is not just censorship and containment and threats of legal action and classifications that keep important information about war away from the politics and away from journalists. It is also the complexity and the acronyms and other details. And in the case where you have 91,000 reports, simply the sheer amount of information. Which information is important can be quite hard to find. So we now have this really quite impressive interface that was done with the help of graduate students at the Minnesota Institute of Technology. And you can see this on diarydig.org. And you'll be able to search for any keyword, unit names, and you can have other limitations, say, by the number of people killed and so on. This is an example of the top kill report, where 191, where there's 191 casualties, 181 people killed in Operation Medusa, an event occurring about 20 kilometers outside of Kandahar in August 2006. And that event and this report didn't make it into the reportage by The Guardian, Der Spiegel or New York Times, simply because a lot of stuff happened and there wasn't time to understand what happened in this event. Very unusual event with so many people killed, most of them by an AC-130 gunship. But there wasn't time to understand. So we have made all these events easier for everyone to understand because those major media players simply do not have the economic power and time to get through material like this. We effectively only reveal in those news stories a sample of what is occurring. If we look to see why most press in countries that are not full of fear like the United States, but outside the United States, why most press don't report this sort of information. This is why. This is what the report looks like. At 024Z, CJSOTF requested a medvac for 2ANA, etc. So it seems to be unreadable. I can read this, but any military non-specialist can't read this. But we have written a system here to expand acronyms. And okay, now you have an understanding of what this is like. It's almost a decryption operation where we go from military acronyms to something that people can read straight away. And in pursuing this particular story, which is a complex event and a troubling one, you see that it was part of a Canadian-led task force in Operation Medusa. which, if you look at news reports, if you look at statements by NATO at the time, where they bragged that this killed about 1,000 people during that week of operations. And researching it, we came to a Canadian military website which has recently put up a history of Operation Medusa. It looks like attempting to presage a book that is coming out in September on this operation. And on that website there's an interview with a Canadian journalist, Graham Smith, who works for the Daily Mail. And I think this interview really helps to understand why so little information, quality information, is coming out from embedded reporters. Graham Smith was embedded in Operation Medusa, and we can see.
My name is Graham Smith. I'm a reporter for the Global Mail. In September 2006, I had one of the most intense experiences of my life. I was on the front lines of something called Operation Medusa. It was a big Canadian offensive against the Taliban, who were massed outside of Kandahar city. The Taliban were digging trenches and intimidating locals, and the Canadians decided to sweep in there in big numbers and force them out. And I was traveling with a platoon that called themselves the Nomads. These were guys who had been sent all over, sort of a 50,000 square kilometer box out to the very edges of Kandahar city. And so they were moving around all the time. They were never sleeping in the same place twice. And they had even made up these little patches for the uniforms that said Nomads on them. The Nomads took me in, and they sort of made me one of them. I spent what was originally supposed to be just a 2 or 3 day embed with them, stretched out into 2 weeks. I didn't have a change of underwear, I didn't have a change of shirt. I was showering in my clothes, washing first the clothes on my body, and then stripping the clothes off and washing my body. And that was just using a bucket as a shower. And it was an intense experience. I slept in my flak jacket a lot of nights. We were under fire together. We had RPGs whistling in. One time I was standing around behind a troop carrier, and we were just sort of relaxing. We were in a down moment, and I think some guys had coffee out, and were standing around. And I heard a loud clap beside my right ear. It was like someone had snuck up behind me and sort of played a prank by clapping beside my ear. And I turned around and said, "Hey, that's not really funny. That's kind of loud." And all of the soldiers are lying on the ground because they know what to do when an incoming sniper round comes in. And I did it because it was my first time under fire. So I threw myself to the ground as well. They had sort of made me one of them, and so they gave me a little Nomad patch that I attached to my flak jacket. And as a journalist, you try to avoid drinking the Kool-Aid, but I did feel as much as long as it was okay.
So I think that confession made to the Canadian military for one of their own internal documentation projects really does sum up why embedded reporting has been so effective in confining the truth. We see people like Graham Smith here, not wanting to pick him out in particular merely because he's an example. Essentially writers entering into an environment where they are amongst men and feel extraordinary to me that having to wash the clothes on their body while they're wearing them is some kind of profound experience. And that the support by the mutual defense of the troops with him and his adoption by people who have more physical power than writers normally have leads him to a sense of belonging. And of course, once one has a sense of belonging, then it is hard to be objective. But it's not just